Hoosier Football Tailgate is sponsored by BetUS. Use promo code TAILGATE and get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. BetUS is where the game starts.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on thehoosier.com, powered by On3 Sports. Thanks for joining me here this evening. We're going to have a little fun time here tonight, talk a little bit of the Hoosiers football and what is coming up in terms of the summer. Colin McMahon will join us as well from thehoosier.com. We'll talk a little bit about some of the position groups that he sees as being critically important to the success in the upcoming season, as well as some things that are happening in college football at the moment as it pertains to some of the things that have been talked about here of late. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you're on YouTube, retweet on X. Make sure you get over to thehoosier.com, take advantage of the first month and the 50% off for the rest of the year deal that has there to get the Hoosier.com's coverage, as well as On3, as they are the leading experts in all things college football, basketball, you name it. On3 has you covered, just like the Hoosier.com has you covered on your Indiana Hoosiers. It's been a whirlwind of a spring as we jump here into the month of May. Normally we're talking about the Indy 500 and what may or may not happen at the end of the month as the track is open. And I know some of you probably have some history and traditions that are centered around the Indianapolis 500. I was fortunate to work for Bill Lynch at Ball State back in the day, and a lot of guys on our staff had tickets in turn 4, and they had been passed down through the generations. And I'm sure they're going to be utilizing those tickets again here at the end of the month. And hopefully we'll have a nice and sunny race weekend as the Indy 500 kicks off here at the end of the month. And I hope everybody's enjoying some of the playoff action that we're getting to experience right now in some of the professional leagues. NBA, Pacers are going well. Not to sidestep the subject areas here, but and then the NHL playoffs. I'm a big hockey nut and enjoy watching the NHL playoffs every time it's on, and that has been pretty spectacular as well. But wanted to talk a few things here before we get Colin on here in a few minutes about some things that have been out in the college football world. We're still waiting on the writing off of the House versus NCAA settlement lawsuit. I am expecting that to happen at any time. We talked about that a little bit last week and probably for about the last 6 months, 6 months as we are awaiting some clarifications on some things, roster size limits being one, as well as the split that schools will utilize for the broadcast dollars that will come into the institutions. I've heard everything from 75% to 80% being utilized for football at IU, but do not have anything other than rumor and innuendo, which is not very good to overly speak of, but that's kind of some of the things that have been throwing around there. Been a lot of things that are coming out of all the different publications at this time of year as well. Top 100 football players released by On3. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as some of the different things that are going to happen. One of them being, we'll talk a little bit about the college football playoffs and the seeding of the tournament. It looks as if that is going to happen this next college football playoffs, them getting away from some of the bye games and maybe the group of five having that automatic bye that they had this year. They're going to get to do true seeding of the tournament for the 12 teams. I don't think the 16-team playoff will come into play this year, but who knows? They may push it in and get it done and have it for this upcoming season. I know there's a lot of institutions and conferences and stuff that want to see that. The Big Ten and SEC probably will get 4 no matter what, whether it's a 12 seed or it's a 16 seed, which bodes well for the Big Ten and for teams like Indiana or those teams that Illinois is going to be a team that's probably going to be in the top 10. These are all things that would be of value if they went to a 16-team tournament. But I do think regardless, 12 or 16, I do believe the Big Ten will probably get at least 4, unless something were to happen where, the ACC or the Big 12 really has 2 dominant teams or 3 dominant teams that could argue that they should be in over a fourth Big Ten team. But those are all things that are to be determined as well. But I do believe the seeding aspect of the tournament, which is needed, as we saw from this last year, to make it a true top to bottom 1 through 12 type of setup, and giving those teams in that scenario that have the, I guess you could say, better team, better record of getting a home game for, let's say, for instance, especially in that first round is always critical. And how that all plays into the bowls and things of that nature will be to be determined. But other than that, the one thing that came out towards the end of last week, first of this week, is this President's Commission on NIL, and Nick Saban being the one kind of being tabbed as a co-chairman of. I see that he's kind of backtracking a little bit on that, but he's the one that went to the president and was very outspoken about needing to have something done by legislators, and our legislators don't do anything. They make $175,000 a year and they sit and shout at each other and see what deals they can put together that puts money in their pocket, but they're not going to worry about the college football NIL. They're the ones that, got it on the front burner. And it's kind of what we've dealt with for the last year or so, and being it's the wild, wild west. But a commission has been established per se, co-chaired by Saban and others, to be determined as far as who all will be on this commission and how it will all go as it pertains to implementation and things of that nature. But I've already seen a couple articles about, is Nick Saban the best voice for college football? Some think that he may be the best voice for Alabama, but maybe not be the best voice for college football as a whole. But yeah, I found that pretty interesting, especially Nick Saban backtracking a little bit after having been outspoken for a number of weeks on the subject of the NIL and how it's, crippling college athletics. And don't get me wrong, there needs to be something done per se when it comes to that aspect of things, because there are teams and institutions that are facing some serious issues. One of them being Iowa State. If you get a chance, look up the Iowa State AD's interview that he did here over the last week, talking about Iowa State's predicament and how NIL and things of, like, for instance, the broadcast money, and how their board of directors there at the institution, I guess, has something in their rules and regulations that would not allow them to have that money filter back to the athletes. And that being said, the athletic department would be on the hook for that. They have a reserve build up, but he says they'll go through that in 2 years. And if they go through it, the institutions in the world hurt. They're going to have to decide whether they want to be a P4 program or completely drop away from the P4 and get into the group of 5 somehow, because they're not going to have the money in the coffers there at Iowa State to even compete. So that was an interesting interview to take a listen to, because that will impact not just them. There's a lot of teams and universities right now that are not in great shape when it comes to this. And Indiana, there is a great article on the Hoosier.com talking about Indiana's commitment to the athletes and, the athletic department and what Scott Dolson's done and President Witten as it pertains to that in itself, and how healthy of a program that they've got with that. And they spent the last 3 or 4 years prior to this becoming a aspect of college athletics doing the work to determine how this was going to go. And those schools that had a plan for it have a way of adapting, adjusting, and improvising. But when you have a situation like Iowa State, where all the reserve monies that they have built up, all of a sudden they'll burn through in 2 years. It's a pretty scary component. So it is something that has to be talked about, discussed as it pertains to NIL, as well as everything that's pertaining to collective bargaining. But I just found some things like that pretty interesting. And that's kind of what we in the football world right now are kind of glued to, because there's just not much as per se when it comes to college football all over the country right now, other than the recruiting season, the camp season, which is coming up very quickly here in June. And it'll be a very vital point of emphasis for Coach Signetti and his camps that are on campus through the month of June, and having kids from the 26th class through the 28th class on campus for different days to be evaluated and pick up offers through the camp season that runs through the month of June. And that's what they're really gearing up for from the coach's standpoint, as well as finishing the on-road recruiting that they've been doing thus far for the month of May. So there's a lot of wheels turning in the off season. They just don't get a 3-week or a month vacation as much as they would like it to happen when, graduation occurs and everybody goes their own way. The month of May is vitally important for recruiting. And then you segue into the month of June for camps. And then you maybe get a 2 to 3 week period there prior to having to be back on campus ready to roll at the end of July, because camp's going to be starting. So it flies by fast, and coaches get about a 2-week breather before they pick back up, and they're into it hot and heavy for the 25 season. And that will all happen in a blink of an eye. But, some interesting there about the seeding, Coach Saban and his situation there, as well as what the coaches can expect from the summer months as it pertains to what they are up to. It's important to understand those dynamics. Don't forget, you've got the big Hubers outing coming up here this month, I believe, as well, where you'll have Coach Signetti, Coach DeFreeze down there talking about things, as well as other aspects of the program. And that will all be coming up here in the month of May. So very active in that regard, but pretty inactive when it comes to the Hoosiers and what is all occurring right now in the month of May. As we segue here to bring Colin on here real quick. Let's see if I can get this right. And there he is, Mr. Colin McMahon. Colin, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Perfect. There we go. Colin, appreciate you coming on this evening. We were just talking about some of the different aspects of things that are occurring right now, because there's not much to really overly discuss football wise, other than some of the things that we're going to talk about here coming out of spring. And then what are some of the things that are going to be needed for this season when it comes to player personnel and things of that magnitude. But you talk about other things that are happening in college football. I was just talking about the President's Commission that Nick Saban has been asked to lead as a co-chair to talk about NIL and be coming up with guardrails, I would say, for that, and already being a lot of pushback on him being involved in it, because I don't think many people think his voice is good for college football overall, but it's pretty good for Alabama. But there's some of that occurring in college athletics now, and then we're talking about seeding the tournament as we head into this next college football playoff season coming up in the 25 season. Doubt if they'll get to the 16 teams in it this year. I know there's a big push to, but I do still think that the Big Ten will get 4 in, and as far as the SEC will get 4, and then ACC and the Big 12 will split what's left. But I guess from your perspective, I know you guys have probably loving this time of year where you get to take a little bit of a breather, but not too much because of recruiting, both on football side of it and basketball side of it. But what were some of your thoughts coming out of this past spring in terms of, you know, things that you saw that either concern, positive, you know, you thought, well, that is going to be a huge positive leading into the season? What are some of those things that you thought from your perspective are key components coming out of the spring?
Well, you know, the only chance that I got to see in person of Indiana was the spring game. And if you know about Indiana spring game, it's not much, you know, it's just a half of football, but that's not to say that there wasn't anything there. The main takeaway that I had, which was interesting, I wasn't expecting that takeaway, was the freshmen that we saw on the field making plays. And, you know, I wrote a story on it for the Hoosier.com, and it opened my eyes. Specifically, LeBron Bond and wide receiver was kind of the position, especially when Tyler Morris went down, that I circled, and I was like, they might be a little weak. Indiana might be a little weak at the receiver position. And that gave LeBron Bond an opportunity to show in the spring game what he can do. And then they picked up Jonathan Brady in the transfer portal from Cal, and that was a huge pickup because I feel like he's going to slot in right into that slot receiver position. And so now your starting wide receivers are going to be Surratt, Cooper Jr., and then most likely Jonathan Brady. And I think that'll work for the most part. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces. You know, we thought Donovan McCulley was going to be a big target, and that didn't turn out the way it did. So wide receivers, not as big of a question mark, but still kind of a position that I have my eyes on because it really is going to make a difference. We know Fernando Mendoza can really throw the ball, and we know the running backs. I mean, 3 really good running backs in that running back room. We know the offensive line is going to be solid with the transfers that they got. But as far as, you know, the biggest thing that I'm thinking of is wide receivers. And then also, you try not to get ahead of yourself, but the schedule this year is a lot more daunting than it was a year ago. And then, like you were talking about with the playoff seeding, where does Indiana slot in? Is 10-2 what's needed to get in? Somehow 9-3, is that possible? Probably not 9-3, but it's kind of what wins do you need to get into the 12-team playoff? Because once you're in, anything can happen.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, and I trying to predict that is, you know, again, it's hard to tell what will and will not get in. I guess it depends who you are in some respects. Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois, a bad loss at home, and by the time the end of the year rolled around, everybody had forgotten about that, you know, because of maybe their huge win on the road at USC and things of that magnitude. But a school like Indiana or Illinois, for instance, who's probably going to be a top 10 team coming into the season, their margin for error is razor thin in some respects as it pertains to getting into the playoff with a record that's not a 10-2 mark per se, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But you're correct about, some of the rooms you talked about there. The wide receiver room, when they got, it's Brady, right? I keep Brady from Cal. I thought that was a huge, and I can imagine Mendoza played a huge part in that recruitment of his former receiver there that was a pretty prime target in their offense at Cal. And that chemistry already is intertwined in the room with the chemistry that was developed over the spring. So there's a lot of trust and a lot of comfort with him coming into the mix now with that group that is here. And I do think it's a deep room that can play up to 8 guys, or we may see some 4 wide receiver sets this year because they may not feel they've got the Horton type of tight end that can flex out and be a route runner in space and things like that. So you brought up Bond, who I've liked ever since last year. A lot of speed. He's a young pup. Repetition is going to be the key component there. Will he be able to come back in the fall camp and still progress in enough that they can throw him into that rotation? Again, to be determined, but you're correct. Significantly upgraded with getting Brady in the mix there at wide receiver. The running back room, yes, again, there's another prime example of losing your 2 top runners from a year ago, but replacing them with a guy that you already had on a roster who was pretty darn good, even though he wasn't in the rotation with Mr. Keon Black, and then adding Hemby and Abibi, who both come in with the ability not just to run the ball, but their threat to catch the ball, which will be something a little bit different for Indiana this year. And that article, I think it was the article that you're just referencing there, talking about some of this stuff, as well as I think it was Drew as well, talking about Mendoza and what he brings to the table as a quarterback. Indiana moved Rourke out, and when I talk about moved him, I'm talking in the pocket less than 25% last year, which means 75 to 80% of the time, the defense knew the launch point. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because your offensive linemen who are protecting the quarterback, if the defense already knows with a pretty good certainty where the quarterback's going to be when he launches the ball, they can really pin their ears back and come after it because they don't have a threat of him pulling it down and running it per se. Now with Mendoza and his ability to run sprint out passing game, run a bootleg passing game to help the offensive line with protection is a huge component we will see this year from the Indiana offense, utilizing Mendoza's ability and athleticism to get out and do things on the run. And I do think you'll see some quarterback run schemes involved in the offense. Not, nothing crazy, but I do think it'll be within their package more so this year than this past year because of Curtis's ACL issues. But no question on that side of the ball, those skilled positions that we just discussed, no question, those guys are Big Ten type of players that can stack up pretty well against any other offense in the league. I guess the biggest thing that I think that is surprising for us to even think about or say is, and I don't know, did you get to see Sig's interview with McElroy from ESPN the other day? Get a chance to take a look at that. And those out there also get a chance to look up that interview. It was a very good interview. McElroy was at Alabama when Sig was there. I believe he may have been like a freshman, Sig's last year. But the first thing that Signetti talked about was how good he feels the offensive line is. And they've got depth. They've got 5 guys that they feel are Big Ten caliber offensive linemen that are big, they're strong, and they can move well. Have you ever heard Indiana being talked about and leading off with the offensive line as being the strength of the offense?
I mean, when you have an offensive line last year, right, that was solid. Obviously, at times protecting Rourke was an issue, but then you go and add two guys, one from Ohio State, one from Notre Dame. I mean, those are programs that are known for producing their offensive linemen, and so not only the returners, but the transfers that you bring in. I mean, Carter Smith, I had him as potentially a late round draft pick. That's how good he is as a returner. And then you bring in Pat Coogan. Everyone knows him for his viral clip at Notre Dame. But aside from that, he's a really good player that, you lose Mike Kadick. That's a huge loss. But to bring in a guy like him, that could close the gap and even potentially surpass Kadick's production at center. And then Zen Mikulski, hopefully I'm pronouncing that one right.
Yeah,
but
you did.
He's a good player. I mean, Ohio State is the cream of the crop, not only for the Big Ten, but nationally of producing talent. And so you get a guy who can, has that Big Ten experience from playing at Ohio State. That's huge. And so I do agree with Signetti there that the offensive line, at first might not be up to what it was a year ago, but as you progress through the season and when the games really start mattering against the Oregons and against the Penn States of the world, those are going to be the two games that really determine everything. And I think by that point, the offensive line this year might be even better than it was a year ago. And a year ago was pretty special and provided that protection not only for Rourke, but then for the running backs who had two huge seasons in Lawton and Ellison. And so I think with the running backs that Indiana's brought in, and then Mendoza, who, like you mentioned, is more mobile than Rourke, I think the offensive line is going to elevate those two things to the next level. And I think it'll really pay off.
Talking with Colin McMahon here from thehoosier.com. If you're in the chat, by all means, if you got a question for Colin or myself, by all means, put it in there. We'll try to get it answered for you as well. And appreciate you guys, as always, being a part of the show. So go ahead and throw anything in there you want. We can talk about it as we go along here. And I already saw one, the previous comment when Sig says we're going to be good at something. That means we're going to be really good at something, which is probably true because he doesn't necessarily oversell anything. He's a under promise, over deliver type of guy in that regard. But I think there's no question. The offensive line right now in the black and white of it translates into a better offensive line than a year ago at this time. Coogan being a big part of that. The dude's 6'5", he's 310 pounds. He's definitely a guy that probably maybe top, in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft potentially next year because of, he's playing at Notre Dame and how he played last year. Losing his spot, then having to be called back in because the guy that took his spot got injured, and played as well as he did. That tells you a lot about his character. And then when he's up in front of the room speaking, he handles the room very well and how he just talks and enunciates and speaks about his experience, not only at Notre Dame and what led him here to Indiana, but you can see why Coach Bobstead probably sleeps a little bit better at night, knowing that he's a guy there that can be counted upon for a lot of things. And again, got to stay away from injuries, but they do have guys that can step into that in that position. And you talked about Zen. Yeah, I mean, the dude's 6'8", I believe, and that's, right then and there is, you can't coach 6'8". I mean, you just can't coach it. And that bodes well for a quarterback that needs to have his backside protected. And Carter Smith has been a pretty good player there already. Now he's got a equal talent as bookends. That bodes well in that regard, not only in the passing game, but in the run game. And we can't be a one-dimensional team. Indiana's success has to be an offense that can also be a threat to run the football and utilize both phases of the game to set up opportunities for anybody that's handling the football when it comes to it. But Terry Davis wants to know, do we expect Tyler Cherry to transfer at some point or stay and compete? Well, I'll let Colin answer that here just in a second. Preference a couple of things about Tyler. Lost him at the end of the season last year prior to the actual college football playoff game. Injury bad enough that he'll miss the entire season, which is a huge blow in terms of his own development. Now, they moved him into a student coach's position because roster sizes and things of that nature become very, very important as we head into this year. So moving him into a student coaching role allows him to stay involved, be a part of it, see the game from a different perspective, but at the same time, not occupying a spot. Now, I'll let you handle the rest of it. What are your thoughts as it pertains to Tyler Cherry, potentially staying and competing it out or potentially looking to transfer? Now, we know Mendoza has 2 years. Now, that being said, there are already discussions of him potentially, depending on the year that he has, of being a top 10 draft pick in the NFL draft next year. So he could be a one and done type of guy. But talk about Tyler Cherry, what your thoughts and kind of maybe what your buddies are talking about down there in Bloomington all the time as it pertains to his future at IU.
Yeah, when he committed, Indiana fans are happy because he's an in-state guy, Center Grove High School. And whenever an Indiana kid commits, especially at a quarterback position, that's, eye-opening. And then obviously last year he didn't play as a redshirt season his freshman year. That comes as no surprise with the level that college football is at these days. And then, you suffer an injury that's going to keep you out the entire season. And so they go the route of having him be a student coach, be around the team, but not take up a roster spot. And I think that's a decision that Tyler and then Indiana as a staff made collectively with the help, obviously, of the doctors there. Because when it's a medical thing, when it's an injury thing, the doctors have just as much a say, if not more of a say, than the player or the staff, because obviously, first and foremost, the health of the player is what's most important. And so he'll sit out the whole season, but I think that being a player coach, what tells you is that this is a smart kid. This is a kid that the staff wants to have near them, and he obviously can bring something to the table from an intelligence standpoint somehow on the field. So I think that after this season, the doctors, Cherry, and then Indiana are going to have to reassess the situation. If he can go, then he'll have to make the decision whether to stay at IU or to transfer. Based on, Mendoza's situation, I'm not sure whether he's going to stay another year, because if you're a first-round pick in the NFL draft, you go to the NFL draft. That's a once in a lifetime experience. If he stays, he might get it again, but obviously injuries can happen. So if Mendoza is going to be a first round pick, he's going to go to the NFL draft and not use his last year of eligibility. If that happens, Tyler Cherry, I wouldn't say would be an option for a starting role. I think that Cignetti would probably want to dip into the portal again and get a guy with experience. It worked with Rourke. Obviously, this year with Mendoza, he has a year and a half of starting experience at a Power 4 program. And so I don't think that Cherry would be an option as a starting quarterback next season. Now, he could become a backup for the Hoosiers because he'll still have 4 years of eligibility, because last year didn't count for a red shirt and then this year medically. So if he decides to stay, he could be a valuable option down the line. But if he wants to start soon as in next football season, 2026, transferring would probably be the best option for him there.
Well, and that's the uniqueness of the quarterback position and why it is a position that's always going to be in flux now because of the portal and opportunities that may exist at other programs for a quarterback to jump in the QB1 slot. Now, one nice thing is that they're recruiting his brother, who is a pretty dominant defensive end down there at Center Grove. And he's also a pretty good baseball player, and I don't know which direction he's going to end up going. That will be an interesting dynamic there when it comes to all that in that regard. Terry says Enter Mendoza won't be better starter. So the other Mendoza won't be the starter in your opinion. Probably not from my perspective, because I think Alberto still has some things that he has to mature as a quarterback. I do think he made a huge stride in the spring. I think Signetti thinks he made a huge stride in the spring. And I think his upside is only going to get better with repetitions. And I do think he'll probably be the backup going into the year with Wilson as well, depending on what the scenario is, if they had to go to him in that regard. You can have your take as it pertains to Alberto.
Yeah. So a couple of days ago, actually, I wrote the story of a post-spring preview for the quarterbacks, and it was an interesting decision for a backup quarterback, whether you go with Alberto or you go with Grant Wilson. Obviously, Grant Wilson, transfer from Old Dominion. He has, tons of college football experience, both at the FCS level and then at the FBS level. So he's the more experienced player. But I had Alberto Mendoza as my backup. Obviously, it's not set in stone or anything as of right now, but I think the potential that he shows, it's a little bit different than Fernando. Fernando's at 6'5", he's a big guy. Alberto is smaller. He's only at 6'2", I think he's listed as. And so it's a little bit of a different game. You might see him if the offense wants to do a quarterback run, you might sub in Mendoza for Mendoza there and have Alberto run the ball. So, at this point, fighting over a backup role is something that's there, but it's not necessarily extremely pertinent because you know who the starter is. Fernando Mendoza is your QB1. And then after that, if the worst happens and Fernando somehow gets injured, then you kind of have that conversation. But as of right now, the offense is pretty set at quarterback. And I think that when you lose a guy like Curtis Rourke, who finished 9th in Heisman Trophy voting, that usually doesn't bode well for a program looking to repeat as a college football playoff team. But Indiana might even be better this year at quarterback because of the potential that both Mendozas, but more Fernando Mendoza presents. Curtis Rourke wasn't getting this kind of draft talk ahead of his Indiana season, and Fernando is. And I think if that tells you anything, that what Mike Shanahan and the offense is going to do with him might be pretty special.
Yeah, there are opportunities there in that regard from that standpoint. Yeah, Brian, I appreciate that very much and appreciate you being a part of the tailgate as well. And we aim to try to give you the best coverage in print and in podcasting and video that we can at thehoosier.com. Don't forget to get your subscriptions for thehoosier.com as well as On3. But yeah, Shanahan is going to have a little bit more tools in his toolbox this year to address maybe some things that they weren't able to because of Curtis's knee. So we'll see. I do think, when you talk about the difference between Fernando and Alberto, the difference there is probably mostly Alberto probably fits a little bit more in what Shanahan and Signetti did at JMU in terms of their quarterback, with more of a quarterback run flavor in the system, because that's probably in his skill set. Not to say that he's a different type of thrower and can't throw the football. He throws it very well. So I do think we're all set in that regard when it comes to that position. One other one, John says, we gave up 21 sacks last year. Do we see 15 or less this year? Well, I think so, because Indiana only had 75 pressures on the quarterback last year, meaning they only had 20.8% of the time they felt a pressure on Rourke. Now, for Mendoza, who saw 42 stacks last year, he had barely enough time to set up and find his receivers in some instances. He may have so much time back there, he won't know what to do with it because of the way the Indiana offensive line protected. So I do believe that they'll keep their sacks down. And they did a pretty good job of that last year. Their biggest struggle last year was when they ran into the buzzsaw of Michigan and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks. You're getting into that upper tier talent in the Big Ten. Now, they played and won against Michigan, but that second half against Michigan was not as good as what it had been previous games. And then Ohio State outside of the first score of the game, which put everybody on their edge of their seat, wasn't the best either, because after that they had turnovers, the inability to move the football, the special teams started hurting them, and you saw what happens to a team that makes critical mistakes against a team that is a national champion caliber type of team. So it's one of those things that I do think they'll be better in that realm as well. One last thing here before I know that you probably need to get out of here, and I've kept you longer than I said I would. I lie. Okay. So don't hold it against me, Colin. All right. We talk a lot about offense, but I think one thing has to be said about this defense that is returning for Indiana and what has been added to make up for CJ West going into the draft and Walker leaving and adding who they did in the secondary, as well as up front along the defensive line. Defense is going to be a huge part again of how successful Indiana is this year. And they were successful last year because of their run defense, and they were in the top 2 in the nation in that category, as well as scoring defense. I think they were in the top 10 in those categories. So, what are your thoughts out of spring with the defensive side of the ball here, Colin?
I think the defense is really strong, and the defense sets the tone, especially when you get into these games where you're facing an opposing defense that's going to limit you on offense. And like we saw that when Indiana played Ohio State last year. We saw that when Indiana played Notre Dame in the College Football Playoff game, where Indiana's offense couldn't do everything it wanted to do, and it kind of had to rely on the defense to help it out. And last year, at times, the defense was the dominant force. Obviously, in those 2 games, Ohio State, Notre Dame, the defense allowed a good amount of points. And so I think that the defense is going to be the key. When you get into those games, will Mikhail Kamara, get that big sack, or will Aiden Fisher make that big tackle? My answer to those is yes. These are guys that are pro-level players that decided to stay another year and use their last year of eligibility to get back to the College Football Playoff. I mean, these are 2 guys that were James Madison players. They were written off their whole career. And last year, even though they went 11-1 in the regular season, they were still written off then too. And these guys are hungry. These guys are determined. And they got a lot of impact transfers. Stephen Daly on the defensive line. He played with CJ West at Kent State. He's a good player that they added later on in the transfer portal. Lewis Moore and Devin Boykin are going to possibly be 2 starters added in the transfer portal. And so Cignetti is methodical with the guys that he adds in the portal. He's not adding guys based off of their rating or just based off of pure numbers. He's adding the right guys. And so the returners like Kamara, like Fisher, Elijah Hardy is another returner that is only going to be a true sophomore that has a ton of talent. D'Angelo Pons, he could be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. You have impact returners, but then the transfers that they brought in, while there's not a ton of them, obviously, like there were last season, they're really going to fill those gaps because of the losses. And honestly, I think the defense is going to be improved when it's all said and done later on in the year. And, like I've said several times over again, that's when it matters. That's when Indiana's schedule really gets going in the second half and beyond. And that's when the recency bias kicks in for playoff selection. And having losses at the end of the season can knock you down a lot of spots when that may knock you down out of the playoff completely. So this defense is going to be key. I expect it to be good. And, defense travels more than offense. And when you have those games at Penn State, at Oregon, at Iowa, I think the defense is really going to be the key there.
Oh, absolutely. No question. The defense is going to be a critical component of the season, as it is any team's season, especially those that want to be good. You have to have complementary football where both offenses and defenses are working in unison, no matter what the scenario is, like Indiana did last year quite a bit. And it paid huge dividends last year. And I think the steal in the portal this year, last year was CJ West. I think this year is possibly going to be the Wyatt kid from Maryland. I think that is going to be he's going to be a big component of this defense. It fits him to a T. And then, of course, you got Daly and some others on that defensive line that I think will play out as well. But I want to thank you, Colin, for joining me here this evening. And you guys can follow Colin on X at Colin31, Colin McMahon 31, correct? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And also the Hoosier.com, where he has a lot of different stories up, not just football, but basketball as well. Does a great job there. But Colin, thanks for joining us here this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the Hoosier.com. I mean, we've got so much content on there. Obviously, we've got a ton of podcasts, including this one, the Hoosier Football Tailgate. You do a great job over here, but online, we've got a ton of great written content. We've got a lot of great writers, and it's only just the start. Once football gets rolling, it's going to be even better. So we're very excited for that as well.
Absolutely. Colin, have a great rest of your week, my man, and we'll catch you again here and get you back.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Yes, Colin McMahon from the Hoosier.com joining me here this evening for a nice little chat about the Hoosier football and some of his takes and so forth. Going to be back right after this message from the Hoosier.com.
Hello, Hoosier Nation. Go to thehoosier.com and take advantage of the 50% off for the first month. Then 50% off on the first year of your subscription. You will get wall-to-wall coverage of the Indiana Hoosiers from Alec Lasley, Zach Browning, and the Coach Shannon Griffith on the Hoosier Football Tailgate. All on the Hoosier. Come.
Yeah, get out and get that subscription today. It's a great setup that we have with On3 as well. They have great coverage in recruiting. They've got NIL evaluations. They've got a ton of stuff over there. Not only there, but as well as the Hoosier.com with Colin and Zach and Alec Lasley. And then, of course, Jimmy Coyle and what he does with Indiana Sports Beat Radio and some of the things that we do together there on the Hoosier.com as it pertains to post-game stuff during the football season. I was glad to join it and be a part of it. And even now that I'm a part of it, really appreciate the guys, the effort they put into it and the excitement they have for Indiana is second to none. And I was talking about this on Jim Coyle's show this morning. I've never seen the excitement that is in Bloomington right now, that is spreading throughout the state for Indiana University and their athletic program, especially with the excitement for football and basketball in terms of two of the major sports at Indiana. With so much promise on the table with Coach DeVries coming in and what he brings to the table. And then, of course, what Signetti was able to do last year. there just is a lot of excitement when it comes to Indiana University and Indiana football and basketball. So it's a very special thing to be a part of. And those alums out there have been wanting something of this nature, to be a part of the water cooler discussions from the months of August through the early to late spring. And I think they'll be able to do it with these two guys at the helm as well. Couple quick things here as we finish up tonight. Again, thanks for joining me here. I appreciate you guys being a part of it and participating, asking questions and things of that nature. And remember, every Thursday night we will have something for you, even though the content out there may be a little thin. We can always find something to talk about. You probably got a video of Mendoza from last year. We can sift through and watch and talk about why his ability is so exciting to have as a part of Indiana. And don't forget, that kid was wanted by Georgia and Miami pretty desperately. And Indiana was able to get him here. So that in itself says a lot about what the kids outside the program are thinking. And you can see some of that in some of the recruiting aspects as well, in terms of the number of kids that are top ranked, 4-star, 5-star, I guess you could say. I call them no doubters, having a interest in Indiana because of what is occurring on the campus there in Bloomington and that excitement that I talked about earlier, because it has done a world of good in the world of recruiting. When these coaches walk into a school anywhere in the country and you already have brand awareness, that's something that you cannot put a dollar amount to when you have brand awareness, no matter where you're at in the country, because of what happened last year. Now, the biggest thing, they've got to continue it. Just like last year when they started getting the stadium full and they were doing it consistently, they've got to continue to do it this year, irregardless of who's appearing on the field. Schedule we'll talk about as we get ready for the season, but I think Colin alluded to it. A 3-week buzzsaw is in front of the Hoosiers, and right now their preparation and what they do between now and the start of camp, through the camp and up through the first 3 weeks of the season, will be critical as it pertains to how well they'll be prepared to take on the likes of Illinois, Iowa, and Oregon in a 3-week grinder, because that will be a tough stretch. And Illinois is a team that was really good last year. They got their recruiting quarterback returning. They are in a lot of publications already in the top 10 in preseason, and some of those publications have Indiana maybe in the top 25. I've already seen 2 don't even have them in the top 25. So that tells you how much respect Indiana has coming into the season as well. But did see something today on On3. They had their top 100 players. Indiana didn't have any in the top 25, but from 25 on, Pons, Kamara, Surratt, Carter, and there was one more that I'm leaving off there, were in the top 100 of players, but that's on on3.com. So get over there to take a look at that. But again, I appreciate you guys joining me here this evening for another edition of the Hoosier Tailgate. I'll catch you next week. But for now, I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on the Hoosier.com, powered by On3. Good night, everybody.